And if we have other questions, I'll answer them. Go ahead and come on up here.
Just more for clarity for me, but the conscience, is that involving willpower, and how does the seared conscience factor into addiction ministry?
Okay. So conscience, the word means con, with, and science, knowledge, with knowledge. And so that's where the law of God comes into factor. Okay, so in other words, the law of God is the knowledge, and then that factor of we have that knowledge, and then we act against it when we sin. So we're violating the knowledge of the truth. And so it's not per se willpower, it's more a matter of the drawing toward or away from the flesh, in that sense of like it's the thoughts of the Spirit that say this is the right thing, we know what the right thing is, we ought to do the right thing, is in contrast to the lust of the flesh. So it's less willpower, it's more just the knowledge that if you do this, it's sin. You know, it's wrong. Yeah.
How does seared conscience kind of play in?
Yeah, so when we commit sin, so I didn't get into this. So when we consistently choose the flesh, we create a bias toward it, which biases us against the conscience, which then creates that searing. And that's where the term reprobate becomes, in other words, reprobate is a natural bias toward the flesh. And it can happen in any area. Reprobate is not exclusive to homosexuality, which is what a lot of people would make assumptions toward. But read Romans chapter number 1. You can be reprobate in relationship to obedience to parents. You can be reprobate in lies and all of those areas. And it's a natural bias toward a particular sin or sins. And in other words, it's the conscience is seared. We've made the decision so much, and or we've made a decision to ignore the conscience so much that it no longer has any influence to pull us back to a point of having to make the decision. We just are default into the flesh on that area.
Could that be healed or corrected?
Yes. Yeah, you certainly. So this is a big theological debate, right? Can a reprobate be saved? And the answer is yes, because when the first time reprobate is used in the Bible is in Jeremiah chapter number 6. It talks about Israel being reprobate silver. But you get into chapter number 7, and he says, do this, and I will receive you. So, we know that he's going to receive back. He says that specifically. So, a person cannot be saved after they die. But and until that point, now there is a sin unto death. The Bible tells us that, and we'll get into all that. But certainly there's an opportunity for salvation. Yes.
Thanks, Pastor. Okay. Appreciate
it. Any other questions? Let's not go down rabbit trails, though. If it's related to what we're talking about, more than happy to answer. But if it's like a rabbit trail issue, let's try and avoid that as much as possible. Go ahead, Scott.
In previous trainings, you've also discussed except for E.
Yes.
In that, working with one individual, he's been through a lot of electroshock therapy.
Yeah. E is physiological. That's a real word. It is a real word. Yeah. Physiological damage.
He seems to be all over the map every couple of weeks. He is engaged. He is not engaged. Yeah. He's following his motions. He's following the Lord. It's like I can never seem to get him on board. What can I do to help him stay consistent?
Heal his brain. I don't know. I'm just there's
what or.
Here's what I'm actually going to answer. I'm not going to answer your question in the way you want me to answer this. There's sometimes there's not a way.
Okay.
You can't help everybody. it'll really help you to acknowledge that.
Okay.
You cannot help everybody. There are times where it's not in your ability or your power, no matter how much you know, to help everyone.
Okay.
And you need to alleviate yourself of that responsibility. Okay? You give what God's given you, and they have a responsibility to accept and apply it. Okay. And if they choose not to, whether that is because they're incapable or whether because they are willfully against it, that is their responsibility at that point. And that doesn't alleviate your obligation to continue to grow in the Lord yourself and learn more and have more of the Word of God in you to be able to offer at a later time. But you should never take on guilt and or a sense that somehow you're a failure for not being able to fix everyone. You cannot fix anyone. All you can do is point people to the answers, and then it's their responsibility to apply them in their own, So that probably isn't the answer you wanted, but it is the answer.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right, we have a short training video that we're going to show you at this time just for comedic relief, and this is Brother Mark counseling. Is what you told me that this is. Yeah. All right, so do we have that for those, but he hasn't seen this before. But even if you have, it's still enjoyable. All right. 1, 2.
Dr. Switzer?
Yes, come in. I'm just washing my hands.
I'm Catherine Bigman. Janet Carlisle referred me.
Oh, yes. Fear of being buried alive in a box.
Yes, that's me. Should I lay down?
Oh, no. We don't do that anymore. Just have a seat. And let me tell you a bit about our billing. I charge $5 for the first 5 minutes. And then absolutely nothing after that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Too good to be true, as a matter of fact.
Well, I can almost guarantee you that our session won't last the full 5 minutes. Now, we don't do any insurance billing, so you would either have to pay in cash or by check.
Wow, okay.
And I don't make change.
All right.
And go.
Go.
Well,
What?
tell me about the problem that you wish to address.
Oh, okay. Well, I have this fear of being buried alive in a box. I start thinking about being buried alive and I begin to panic.
Has anyone ever tried to bury you alive in a box?
No, but truly thinking about it does make my life horrible. I mean, I can't go through tunnels or be in an elevator or in a house, anything boxy.
So what you're saying is you're claustrophobic.
Yes, that's it.
All right, well, let's go, Catherine. I'm going to say 2 words to you right now. I want you to listen to them very, very carefully. Then I want you to take them out of the office with you and incorporate them into your life.
Well, shall I write them down?
Well, if it makes you comfortable, it's just 2 words. We find most people can remember them.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, here they are. Stop it!
I'm sorry?
Stop it!
Stop it?
Yes, S-T-O-P, new word, I-T.
So, what are you saying?
You know, it's funny. I say 2 simple words, and I cannot tell you the amount of people who say exactly the same thing you're saying. I mean, this is not Yiddish, Catherine. This is English. Stop it.
So, I should just stop it.
There you go. I mean, you don't want to go through life being scared of being buried alive in a box, do you? I mean, that sounds frightening.
It is.
Then stop it.
can't. I mean, it's been with me since childhood.
No, we don't go there. Just stop it.
So I should just stop being afraid of being buried alive in a box.
You got it. Good girl. Well, it's only been 3 minutes, so that will be $3.
Actually, I only have a 5, so
Well, I don't make change.
then I guess I'll take the full 5 minutes.
Fine. All right. Well, what other problems would you like to address?
I'm bulimic. I stick my fingers down my throat.
Stop it! Nut of some kind? Don't do that.
But I'm compelled to. My mom used to call me fatty.
No, we don't go there.
But I've been having this dream.
No, we don't go there either.
But my horoscope did say...
We definitely don't go there. Just stop it. What else?
Well, I have self-destructive relationships with men.
Stop it! You want to be with a man, don't you?
Yes.
Well, then stop it. Don't be such a big baby.
I wash my hands a lot.
That's all right.
It is?
I wash my hands all the time. There's a lot of germs out there. Yeah, don't worry about that one.
I'm afraid to drive.
Well, stop it! How are you going to get around? Get in the car and drive, you kook. Stop it!
You stop it! You stop it!
What's the problem, Kathy?
I don't like this. I don't like this therapy at all. You're just telling me to stop it.
And you don't like that.
No, I don't.
So you think we're moving too fast? Is that it?
Yes. Yes, I do.
All right, then let me give you 10 words that I think will clear everything up for you. You want to get a pad and a pencil for this one?
All right.
Are you ready? All right, here are the 10 words. Stop it or I'll bury you alive in a box!
This is not recommended counseling techniques, but everybody's done that. So, well, not buried people alive in a box, but well, I hope you haven't anyway. All right. So, to our 4 corners up here and all this. We have to address all 4 areas that folks are dealing with. And so when we do counseling, even when we do the curriculum, we work on this. So the Formula for Life, the Life's Toolbox, these books are focused on the thought life, okay, changing how we think, but also they're focused on helping us grow closer to the Lord. So there's the spiritual aspect and the thinking aspect connected there. When we have our weekly meeting, we have our 15 Bible Truths session. We call it a set group. We'll talk more about this later in the week, but this is really a time in the meeting time where we fellowship and we connect with other people and discussing the Word of God and its impact on us, and there's an emotional aspect to that. And then also, as part of this process, we're holding each other accountable to physically abstaining from the substances and or pornography or whatever it else is that we're dealing with. So in the process, we're dealing with all 4 aspects of that. And another way we deal with the spiritual side is through having the personal devotional and spending time with the Lord, obviously on a personal level, and the spiritual side of that. So there is all four of these areas we address with the curriculum, but the curriculum won't address it if you don't understand that. And we'll talk more about the program format here later on. We'll talk about the curriculum in more detail later on. But here's a tendency in addiction ministry is that someone might say, well, we're going to have a HOPE program, but they're not doing the personal work like they ought to, so I'm just going to quit using that portion and I'm not going to deal with it anymore. I'm just going to set that aside. We're not going to do that part. We'll just get together and we'll have a set group and then I'll just preach. And so we eliminate that portion. But what happens is that as we do that, we start diminishing the work that we're doing over here in the thought life and the changing of the thinking, okay? And it's kind of like the logic that would be behind a parent going, my kids don't like to eat vegetables, so I'm just going to quit serving them. Okay? Some of you are, said Jeff, some of you are needing to get right with God. Every green thing. So we can't do that because we need to deal with all these different aspects, okay? So when you're dealing with someone, whether it's in one-on-one counseling or whether it is in the group setting, you need to personally recognize how are we dealing with each of these areas and what do we need to emphasize here. And honestly, in some fashion, you need to recognize the individuality of people, that some people have more of an issue in one area than another area. And so that's where the one-on-one work comes in to really bolster that particular area with them. There's some people that they just need, maybe this week, they just need extra encouragement about physically abstaining from or cutting off access to that temptation and that substance or that pornography or whatever it might be. And we need to focus in this week, we need to focus in on that part for them to help deal with that, because they're going to struggle at different times in these different areas. But we can't make every session only about that, or we're not going to be, balanced in how we're approaching all of it, okay? So we have to work through there. Now, all right, now here's where we're going to deviate on our track. And we're just going to lay the groundwork on this, and then we're going to jump off deeper into it tonight or this afternoon and tomorrow, and then on Thursday is where we're going to start getting into the curriculum side of things itself. All right, you have that the other drawing, that third drawing. I was going to wait to do this until tomorrow, but I'm not going to do that. Go to Genesis chapter number 4. Oh, you want to see a cool outline in here? This is alliterated. I was inspired by Andy Sturm. And in chapter 2 is the responsibility of man. In chapter 2, verse number 19 is through the end there, through 19 through 21 is 19 through 20 is the reason of man, reason and understanding and forth. And in verse 22 is the relationship of man, and then in chapter number 3 and verse 21 is the restructuring of man. So that's kind of a cool. See, 4 verse 4. All right, that's the end of our alliteration section of the program. Genesis chapter 4. Verse 1 says, Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain. and said, I've gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and he was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. If thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground, and now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod in the east, on the east of Eden. That's not the end of the story. That's where we're going to stop for now. Okay. So this is this account of Cain is a fundamental study in destructive thinking, okay? Destructive thinking, aspects of it. And it's intriguing that so many destructive thought patterns are present in this one account, okay? But you could take this template here that we're going to talk about, and you could literally lay it over the life of Saul, and you could see it flow through the life of Saul. Ahab, any negative figure in the Bible, you can see these thought patterns. I mean, they're very easy to identify. We're going to spend a lot of time the rest of today and tomorrow on this particular dynamic. But you can also see these things in good people. And we'll identify some of that too, because you can see some of these things in Abraham. Okay, and you can see some of these things in David. So there's, not all of these things are just mean if you think this way, you're just an evil person. But when those people thought this way, it manifested into sinful behavior. Does that make sense? In other words, even a good person that walks with God can also manifest wrong thinking in their life that will produce sinful behavior if they indulge it. Okay? So this is not intended to say this is how all bad people think. It's intended to say these thoughts lead to destruction every time. They lead to destruction. It doesn't matter who they are. And so these might be present in you, and if they are, you need to be honest about it, and you need to deal with it. And we're going to talk about the specifics of how to do that. That's why it's going to take us the rest of the day and tomorrow in really working through details on these, because it has so many manifestations. And it's no doubt why God put this account so early in the Scriptures, because it really does give us an exploded view in this one account of a manifestation of destructive thoughts. Okay, and so let's just walk through this conceptually here. All right, so the first destructive thought pattern on there is expectations. And we're going to start there this afternoon. We're going to get into some, and man, this is so, I've taught on expectations a lot in the past, and so a lot of you have seen me teach, and we got that little step down to down to depression and so forth like that. But there's way more there than I had ever understood, and so, but that is where he starts. He brought his offering because he expected God to receive it. It's clear in the scriptures that it bothered him. He became angry because God rejected his offering because it broke his expectations. And we deal with anger in this book, Conquering Your Anger, and I get a lot of feedback on this book. It is where I began in an issue in my life that began to transform me. This is where I began, okay? And understanding just the way expectations affected me. But they have a lot more manifestation. We'll talk more about that this afternoon. Now, expectations was the beginning point, but then the next thing that we see in him is a blame shifting. And he begins to blame. He first blames Abel, and deals with Abel, but then he also blames God, and he makes this statement in the text where he says, look at verse number 14, thou hast driven me out this day. This is your fault, God. You did this. And it's a blame shifting. And part of blame shifting is self-justification, and it's always based on intentions, in this idea of, like, I wanted to bring an offering that would be a good thing, and you rejected it, therefore my intentions were right, and therefore you're wrong, right? And so it's always by intentions. And often, this is not an evil person thing. This is something all of us tend to do. We tend to judge everyone else by their actions, but we want them to judge us by our intentions. All right? My kids did that when they were growing up. It's like they would get in a fight, or they would be doing something, and they would inadvertently hit their sibling. They say inadvertently, and then you'd say, "Hey, you hurt them. You need to apologize." Well, I didn't mean to. Now, all of a sudden, that means like, oh, well, then you don't need to apologize. If you didn't mean to, it doesn't matter. Right? It's justification based on intention, and then that's part of the blame shifting process. It's not. I didn't mean to do wrong, therefore what happened isn't my fault, it's your fault. It's that blame shifting aspect, okay? And we'll get into a lot more detail on that. But then there's a variation that happens here. This is often can be connected, but it doesn't have to be, okay? One wing of this is self-focus. And when we get into this, we're going to talk about what we were talking about earlier, and I said we're going to deal with the shame aspect. Self-focus is where shame interplays there, okay? And self-focus leads to victimhood thinking. And that is, man, that's an amazing study right there. We're going to hit into that tomorrow. And so this is one side of this, and we can see this in Cain with the expectation. He shifts blame, and he blames Abel, he blames God. Then he becomes very self-focused, and we see that in the text with all the personal pronouns. Thou hast driven me out this day, and I shall be a fugitive, and I shall be, everyone finds me, you'll slay me. And everything was about him. But then we see that manifest into a victimhood mentality in that statement, everyone that findeth me shall slay me, and that I'm a victim here. But also he makes that statement to God that we read just a moment ago, thou hast driven me out this day from thy face. I'm a victim. And he says in verse 13, my punishment is greater than I can bear. I am this huge victim of this conspiracy against me, because I wanted to do something good and you turned it bad, and my intention was right. It's all your fault, God, and it was Abel's fault and your fault, and Cain became a victim. And think about that concept, because Cain committed murder and considered himself the victim. That's a mind-blowing thing, but that's exactly where he was, all right? And we're going to talk about that. So on the other side of this is problem fixation, Problem fixation. And so we fixate on the problem as opposed to on ourself, all right? But you can do both, and Cain does both, All right, but he fixates on the problem, and he's not going to let that problem go, and then that manifests into other areas, and so problem fixation becomes problem enlargement. And problem enlargement is where fear becomes a major factor, and we'll detail that later on. But remember when the well, look, let's not get into that. Look, remember here in our text, he says, everyone that findeth me will slay me. Like he took this fixation on the problem, and then he enlarged it to where everyone wants to kill me. Right? Not only is it's huge, and it's grown larger, and then he makes this statement also. He says, "Thou hast driven me out this day." Notice this, from the face of the earth. That's big. That's everywhere. And then he says, and from thy face. And that's even bigger, because God's everywhere. Right? So he's enlarged this problem to fill the entire universe. Right? Fills the globe, it fills the universe. It's the biggest thing in the whole world. And he enlarges it, and now he has a fear. Because he's enlarged this problem so much, now he has fear, I'm going to get killed. All right? And his fear is actually based on his own responses, because he committed murder, and so he then translates that onto everyone else, and that action he committed becomes his fear. That's interesting. We'll deal with that later on. Okay. This layer here also is the manipulation layer. Manipulation. And manipulation, man, there's a lot on that in the Bible too. And it starts, by the way, in Genesis chapter number 3. We'll get into the details there, but essentially what Cain is really doing in much of his conversation here is he's trying to manipulate God. You need to feel sorry for me. You don't know how bad I have it. Why don't you feel sorry? Saul said that. Saul said, none of you are sorry for me. He was a manipulator. Ahab was a manipulator, crying on his bed. He won't sell me his vineyard. He's a manipulator, all right? And that's in this victimhood and problem enlargement layer. And so then these things come together, and they form, they produce an extreme thinking. And this is where we have the idea here of the everyone that finds me, everyone, no one loves me, everything's against me, it's always this way, no one cares about me, you never do what I need you to do, you always hurt me, these extremes there. But it goes beyond just that concept of extreme in our thinking, in our speech, like everyone, always, never, that way. It also extends to the addictive behavior itself. Okay, so please catch, this is why we're funneling into this idea. Addicts, because of these thinking patterns, naturally become extremists, and not just in addiction. It's just the manifestation of their extremism. But then they come to church, and they come to church twice, and they're ready to enroll in Bible college. Right. And we go, they're on fire. Yeah. No, they're extremists. You need to understand this. They're extremists. Everything they do is extreme. And if they're going to run into the flesh, they're going to run 100% into the flesh. And if they're going to run away from the flesh, they're running 100% away from the flesh. They go on a diet, and they don't eat anything but butter leaf. And they lose 1 billion pounds. And then they go off the diet, and they go and just drink butter. I'm being serious. Extreme dieting is part of this. And people go like this yo-yo. And you go, hey, I thought you were on a diet. I was, but I'm not now. Give me another cake. All right? And you go, well, you know you're going to gain a bunch of weight. Fine. Right? Why? Because they're extreme thinking. You understand what I'm saying? So that guy that comes to class and you go, you know, you need to get in and you need to read your Bible every day. And, well, I'm ready for Bible college. No, you're not ready for Bible college. You need to learn how to live a moderation life. You need to learn how to live a moderation life and then let God accelerate your spiritual service when it's actually the Spirit of God doing it and not just your extremism. I'm honest, a lot of them, they'll start and they burn out. Hardly any of the guys that came through our home ministry weren't like, they were ready to surrender to ministry like within the first month. I'm pretty sure God's called me to be a missionary, you know. Like, and then they get out and they immediately go back into addiction. It's like, what's going on? It's extreme. So when they're on this way, they're extreme that way. And when they're not on that way, they're extreme the other way. It's a thinking pattern that has to be dealt with. And it has to be dealt with in us too. Come on, we're not immune from these thoughts. We're not immune from these things. So this extreme thinking. All right, now, in this process, extreme thinking, when it comes through this vein over here, leads to vindication. Now, we see vindication in the life of Cain two different ways. We see it through violence with Abel. He vindicated himself on that level, and he killed Abel. Okay? But we also see vindication in the life of Cain in chapter number 6, which is intriguing to me. Look over at chapter number 6. And let's start in verse number 5. It says, God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Now notice this next statement. Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It repented the Lord, he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And then it talks about God destroying. It talks about Noah finding grace, and that's a whole nother story there. But verse number 11, it says, and the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with, notice that next word, what? Violence. Okay, so violence is a part of vindication. Vindication can become violent, as it did with Abel. Okay, but another aspect of vindication is the idea of agreement. And what happened is Cain withdrew himself from the presence of the Lord, but he didn't leave the planet. You know what he did? He went out and he spread his wrong thinking to everyone else, to the point that the only person on the planet that didn't think like Cain was Noah. And the thoughts of their heart were only evil continually because they had Cain thinking. And this was Cain's vindication against God. His vindication against Abel was murder, but his vindication against God is, I'll convince everybody to think like I think. And he drew people after him. All right, now, I'm going to make an application here for church here, just right here, okay? This thinking is why people who get mad in church work so hard to pull people out of church instead of just leaving. They're vindicating themselves. I need people that agree with me and see things the way I see them and think the way I think, and we will hurt the preacher, and he will pay for what he has done to me. All right? And this is exactly what Cain was doing against God. Okay? And he pulled the world until God said, we're just going to have to wipe them out. This thinking destroyed everything. Okay? So that's on the vindication side. And then on the other side, we see Cain responding to his problem fixation and problem enlargement with isolation. So here we want everyone to follow us, and here we just hide away in a dark room. Now we see Cain isolate himself, but in essence he departs the presence of God. Now that's a pretty difficult thing to do when you think about the fact that God's omnipresent. But he went out of the presence of the Lord. He isolated himself from God. So we see this manifestation. Now, on your little thing, and I won't try and draw it up here, but there's a little spiral in the middle there, okay? It says anxiety, depression, obsession. Those three things in particular are what secular terminology would call neurosis, all right? That's a manifestation of thinking that produces a behavior. But it continues on in there. It's bitterness and anger and fear and all of those type of things. Now, the way a person responds to this thinking isn't always exactly the same. We all respond differently. But these thinking patterns lead to all of those behaviors, right? And they manifest sometimes in different ways. And not everyone has all of these. Sometimes they just go down one vein or another vein, okay? But they manifest in this fashion. All right, so a while back, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, I saw this book. Actually, I saw a YouTube video of a guy giving a lecture, and the title of the lecture was "Depression is Contagious." And a man by the name of Michael Jakob, I think I said his name right, and he wrote this book called "Depression is Contagious." He was a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist in Australia for 40 years, and his study was exclusively on the topic of depression. And he came to this conclusion that depression was primarily a thinking problem. Now, I'm going to say, and I want to say that like this. We'll talk more about depression later, but there's three things that can lead to depression. Okay, there are physical things that can lead to depression. When there's physiological problems, for instance, if a person has a thyroid problem, it can produce depression. When a person has a traumatic brain injury, it can produce depression. When you have cancer or a brain tumor or menopause, having a baby can lead to depression because your hormones just go out of whack and your chemicals in your body are off, and it can be chemically induced. I'm saying physical things can create depression. Here's the rub against that, though. When the depression is created by physical things, those physical things can be treated and deal with the depression. If you have a thyroid issue, you can either have the thyroid removed or you can take thyroid medication, and you can circumvent the issue and cure the depression if that's what's causing it through that process, okay? If you have cancer, you deal with the cancer and get your body back to a healthy, normal stasis, and it deals with the problem. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the treatment for depression, if it is physical, should not be antidepressants as if that all problems were chemical. But physical things can cause depression. You understand there's a balance there, right? I mean, it's like, let's not be unbalanced in our understanding, okay? So physical things can cause depression. And if it's physical related, and often when someone is dealing with depression and I start counseling them, I also recommend that they go and get a blood panel and just make sure that they're not out of whack in some physical way, because I can't counsel away cancer or thyroid issues. I mean, I don't. You could be the best counselor on the planet. You're not going to fix thyroid issues through counseling. Okay? So, you need to be honest about that. Okay? So there's that side of it. And then there's also spiritual things can cause depression. And David dealt with that in Psalm 42 and 43. He talks about the oppression of the enemy and the spiritual aspects of depression. And so spiritual warfare, spiritual oppression can create depression. And that's exactly what we see in David. We also see that in Saul, by the way. Okay? That an evil spirit troubled him. So there's a spiritual aspect to that. However, let me again reiterate this. Not all depression is just spiritual warfare. It can be part of it. It can be physical. It can be spiritual. But I would submit to you that the majority of depression is through thinking, bad thinking. And so this book, Depression is Contagious, this guy, after 40 years of clinical psychological study, he comes to the conclusion that there are 5 thinking patterns that create depression. And I thought, that's intriguing. And I heard him give that little portion of his lecture, and so I went and bought the book, and I read the book, and I'll say this, he's got a lot of interesting thoughts. It's not a Christian book. He's not a Christian. His answers are terrible, by the way. His answers are Eastern mysticism and all kinds of weird stuff and whatnot, but they're secular answers, okay? But it's interesting, the 5 areas that he targets and says these 5 thinking patterns lead to the majority of depression. Here's what they are. You ready? By the way, I thought this is intriguing because we've been teaching this since I came to school in 1999. I learned this very thing, but not in the same format, okay? He says expectations, self-focus, problem fixation, globalization, and universal thinking. These 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the 5 thought patterns. Now we use different terms, but those are the 5 categories he says lead to depression after 40 years of clinical psychological study. I only say that because I don't think it changed. The Bible's true whether he recognized it or not, but I just think it's interesting after 40 years of clinical study that he came to the same conclusion God told us in Genesis chapter 4. So, depression is certainly an avenue or a part of this thinking process. Anxiety, you're going to see it clearly tonight, tomorrow, clearly where it all stems in here, okay? Obsession and all of those other factors. And my point is that you lay this out on figures in the Bible, characters in the Bible, and you'll start to see thinking processes and behaviors that result from those thinking processes, and you can just see it flow. But you can also, in your own life, if you're able to take an unbiased look at yourself, which most of us aren't, okay? So instead, give the list to your wife, and she'll point out. Now, you're not allowed to point her out, but she can point out to you where you have these problems, all right? And so there's a process here for structurally comprehending and seeing this. Now, all right, now let me tie this in and then we'll open for questions quickly. And if your question is about a specific here, I will be going into great detail on each of these areas, so just be patient on that. But if you have another question that you think I might not hit here. But when we deal with addiction, honestly, it's like every one of these areas is something that you're going to deal with when you're dealing with addiction. These thinking patterns are pervasive. And so you really need to understand a Bible view on them. And it's not just addiction, so I want to be clear on that. And I'm actually, before you ask, this isn't in a book yet. I'm actually working on that. It's formatted. I've got the format layout done. It's going to be a workbook like the Formula for Life or like Restoration Road. This one's on pornography, if I didn't say that. But it'll be in this type of format, but it will not be I will not emphasize exclusively addiction because I think the application is just much broader, so it can be used with other just general counseling. But anyway, that's what we're going to start in this afternoon. We'll start at the top. We'll work our way down through this today and tomorrow. Okay. Are there any questions before we break? Microphone, please. All right.
Again, Dr. Carter, thank you for explaining everything. I read a book recently on narcissism. I can't pronounce it. Would you say that
Yes.
would be a similar category?
Narcissism stems in from expectation thinking. I actually will talk about that specifically this afternoon, yes. Because which is narcissistic definition. So, other questions? When do we reconvene? 4 o'clock. So we'll have lunch, then we'll have naps, or HTO break, or both, and then we'll have, and then we'll start back at 4 o'clock. All right. All right. No other questions? Then let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll be. Oh, do you have a question, real quick? All right, sorry, guys, you don't get to eat yet. Brian has a question. So
we have a guy in our area that advertises that he could help people with addictions and controlling food by hypnosis.
yeah.
What is he dealing with there, and how does that apply to what we're doing here? Is he dealing with their thinking, conscious or subconscious?
In essence, he's trying to circumvent the subconscious behavioral responses and triggers.
Okay.
And there's some marginal aspects to that. It's not something a Christian ought to be involved in.
Sure. Is there effectiveness at some level within the flesh with the lost?
Yeah, with the flesh, but the problem is that it's not in a biblical manner. It's basically saying, let me fix your subconscious without you making a conscious decision of repentance, and therefore it's not a biblical method in any fashion. Yeah.
Sure. I wasn't.
But that doesn't
looking
mean it's
for-
not. I mean, like even lost people can help each other get off drugs. That doesn't mean a secular treatment program is like AA, for instance, isn't completely useless in regards to drug addiction counseling, but it doesn't address the core issues that need to be addressed in a spiritual aspect. So the person often will substitute one bad thing for another. The problem when you start messing around in the subconscious without conscious recognition is that you also create the potential of manifestations in other facets, but also more dangerously, you open yourself up to demonic influence. Yeah. And that's the bigger issue.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. All right. Just say it because I'm, what? What? Oh yeah, I was going to give that. All right, so we're going to pray. And then, way, unless you're gluten-free, okay, everyone else go out those doors while we go eat. No, see, we've changed, and you notice that the food lines are actually in the rooms over here. And so if you go out the hall and down to the right, and then right again, and then before you get to the fellowship hall, turn into one of those rooms either side and go through the line. So you can have a line on either side of the wall and go through. Both lines are exactly the same, and you'll come out into the fellowship hall and just find a place to sit. And this gets us through the line just a whole lot faster, so you have more time there. All right? Yes?
Was there a certain time that we were going to meet at the door?
2 o'clock is when what's the address, Josh? 1615 Southwest 96th is a building that it's our education building. It will initially also house some dorms for us, and we're in the process of remodeling it. But it's if you'd like to take a look at it, it's got a gym and various things. And it was going to be our dorm building, and then the folks next door a year, let's see, last March, they called and they said, would you make an offer? We're closing the nursing home. Would you make an offer on it? And so we prayed about it as a church, and we made an offer that they could give it to us. And we'd be willing to let you donate it. And they didn't like our offer, but they didn't say no. And then they let homeless people get in there and do damage and various things like that. And so they called about 7 weeks ago or so, and they said, "Are you still willing to let us donate it?" And we said, "Yeah." So they're they're giving us that building. It's 50,000 square feet. It needs a lot of repair, and you'll see that if you go in. But it's 50,000 square feet of basically apartments, and so we've had requests. Our emphasis for our Bible college is not on getting people just to come to Beth Haven. We really emphasize, and will continue to emphasize, you using the resources in your own church to train your own people and them serve in your church. That is really our heart. But we do recognize, just like sometimes it's necessary for a person to go to a recovery home, sometimes it's needful that a person go to Bible college and have, maybe it's necessary for them to get on their own a little bit and stand on their own 2 feet and get away from some influences that are around there or those type of things. And so we do have requests frequently for dorms, but we've never had dorms. But once we get this all together, we'll have dorms. And then also we're going to use part of it for when people graduate from Hope Homes, the Hope Recovery Homes, that it'll give us a place for them in one wing of it is going to be transitional from the Hope Recovery Homes back into normal society without basically just, kicking them out and hoping everything works out. So there's dual process, and if you'd like to be a part of that, you can make a check out to Beth Haven Baptist Church. I'm being serious at this point. Bible colleges often raise millions of dollars a year to supplement things. If we had $1 million, we could renovate that building and finish the other building, and have dorms and more facilities to move forward with those things. So if you happen to have $1 million you're not sure what to do with and you'd like to donate it, please take the check out this week and drop it in the offering. And if it's not $1 million, we'll take that also. You have it? All right, never mind. We're not even going to, if it's $1 million, we're not going to ask anyone else for more. It's not. Oh, never mind then.
You said 1615 South of 96. Is that Avenue, Street? Doesn't matter here.
Is it street? You go over to Pennsylvania, which is 1 mile over, and you turn north, and you go past 104th. This is 119th, this light. The next major light is 104th. And before you get to the next major street, it's to the right. So you turn right off Pennsylvania. It's a 2-story prefab concrete building over there. That's where the tour is this afternoon. Okay, let's pray. What? Don't forget your children. Please. Yes, HTO is half price between 2 and 4. Every day. It's glorious. All right, let's pray and we'll go. Brother Daniel, would you lead us in a word of prayer for lunch? You can just stand up and pray right there. It's fine.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to your throne of grace. We thank you, Lord, for this opportunity you've given us to gather together and learn. And I thank you for the time and preparation that's been put into this meeting, Lord, the study that has been done. Lord, I pray that we can take it to heart. Lord, I pray that you help us to learn some things we can take it back to our churches, Lord, and be able to help our people. We love you. Lord, bless the food of our bodies. Lord, bless the hands that made it. We love you, and in we pray. Amen.
Amen.